What happens when one drunken joke can't be unsaid? When the laughter dies, and you're left holding the memory of humiliation you can't take back? I'm Philomel Vane, and I destroyed everything that mattered with 7 words at my boyfriend's sister's engagement party. The evening started perfectly. Rowan had been distant lately, buried in his IT work, barely acknowledging me when I got home from my admin job at Henderson Insurance. But tonight was different. He'd actually ironed his shirt, combed his hair properly, and even complimented my new dress. "You look beautiful, Phil," he'd said, adjusting his tie in our bedroom mirror. "Sable's really excited about tonight. She's been planning this for months." I should have paid attention to that comment, should have asked questions. Instead, I was focused on my reflection, wondering if the emerald green dress made me look sophisticated enough for his family's gathering. Rowan's family lived in a modest 2-story house in the suburbs, the kind of place where the lawn was perfectly maintained, but the furniture was clearly second-hand. His parents, Patricia and Alan Greer, had raised 3 children on Alan's electrician salary and Patricia's part-time work at the local library. They were good people, salt-of-the-earth types, but I'd always felt like they looked down on me. When we arrived, the house was transformed. White lights twinkled along the porch railings, and someone had strung paper lanterns across the backyard. The smell of homemade food drifted from the kitchen, and I could hear laughter from the living room. "Phil! Rowan!" Sable rushed to greet us, practically glowing in a simple blue dress. At 29, she had that natural beauty that didn't need expensive makeup or designer clothes. Her engagement ring caught the light as she hugged me, a modest solitaire that probably cost her fiancé 3 months' salary. "Congratulations," I said, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. "Tell me everything about the proposal." As Sable launched into the story, I noticed the decorations more carefully. The flowers were clearly from someone's garden, arranged in mason jars. The tablecloths looked homemade. Even the cake sitting on the dining room table had that slightly imperfect look of something baked at home rather than ordered from a bakery. "We wanted to keep it simple," Sable was saying. "Family and close friends, good food, good music. That's all we need." I nodded and smiled, but something about her contentment irritated me. Here she was, celebrating with borrowed decorations and homemade everything, acting like it was the most beautiful party in the world. Meanwhile, Rowan and I had been together for 8 years, had a 7-year-old daughter together, and he'd never even mentioned marriage. The wine helped ease my irritation. Patricia had opened several bottles of decent red wine, and I found myself refilling my glass more frequently than usual. Rowan was deep in conversation with his father about some electrical project, barely noticing my increasing consumption. "Mummy, look what Aunt Sable gave me." Our daughter Daisy appeared at my elbow, holding a small jewelry box. "It plays music when you open it." "That's nice, sweetheart," I said, ruffling her dark hair. Daisy looked so much like Rowan, with his serious brown eyes and careful way of observing everything before speaking. "She said when I'm older, I can be in her wedding," Daisy continued. "Can I, Mummy? Can I wear a pretty dress and throw flowers?" "We'll see," I said, taking another sip of wine. The alcohol was making everything feel slightly unreal, like I was watching the party through a soft filter. By 9 o'clock, most of the guests had arrived. Rowan's extended family, Sable's co-workers from the veterinary clinic where she worked, and her fiancé Marcus's relatives filled the house with warm chatter. I recognized some faces from previous family gatherings, but I'd never made much effort to remember names or build relationships. "Phil, come meet my college roommate," Sable called, waving me over to a group by the fireplace. "This is Jennifer, and her husband Tom. They drove down from Chicago for tonight." Jennifer was one of those effortlessly elegant women who made expensive clothes look casual. Her husband Tom had the confident bearing of someone who'd never worried about money. They were exactly the kind of people I wanted to impress. "Lovely party," Jennifer said, glancing around the living room. "So intimate and personal." "Yes," I heard myself saying, It's very authentic. The wine had loosened my tongue in a way that felt dangerous but exciting. Not everyone can pull off this kind of homespun charm. Tom laughed, a sound that encouraged me to continue. I mean, look at this spread. Everything homemade, decorations that probably cost $20 total. It's like something out of a magazine article about budget entertaining. I was performing now, playing the role of the sophisticated insider who could appreciate irony. Jennifer and Tom were smiling, which I interpreted as approval. Other people had drifted closer, drawn by my animated tone. It's refreshing, really, I continued, gesturing with my wine glass. In a world of overpriced wedding planners and destination proposals, this family keeps it real. No pretensions, no trying to be something they're not. I should have stopped there, should have recognized the warning signs in the way conversations around me had quieted, should have noticed that Rowan had looked up from his conversation and was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. But the wine and the attention were a potent combination. I felt witty, insightful, like I was providing commentary that elevated the evening's entertainment value. I mean, let's be honest, I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. This is exactly what you'd expect from this family. Low class, but in the most charming way possible. The silence that followed was absolute. Not the comfortable quiet of people listening, but the shocked stillness of a room full of people who couldn't believe what they'd just heard. I looked around, confused by the sudden change in atmosphere. Jennifer's smile had frozen on her face. Tom was staring at his shoes. Patricia's face had gone white, and Alan had set down his beer with the careful precision of someone fighting for control. But it was Sable's reaction that made my stomach drop. She didn't cry or gasp or storm out. She simply went very still, her face blank, and then quietly slipped her engagement ring off her finger. She held it in her closed fist for a long moment, staring down at her hand, then slowly put it back on, like she was reminding herself of something important. "Sable," I started to say, but she turned and walked toward the kitchen without looking at me. The party didn't end immediately. People were too polite, too shocked to know how to react. Conversations resumed in careful whispers. Someone turned the music up slightly, but the warmth had drained out of the evening like air from a punctured balloon. Rowan appeared at my elbow, his hand firm on my arm. "We need to talk," he said quietly, guiding me toward the empty dining room. I expected him to defend me, to explain that I hadn't meant anything cruel. Instead, he looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between disappointment and genuine confusion. "Do you know how long she saved for this night?" he asked. I stared at him blankly. "What do you mean?" "The food, Phil. She cooked everything herself because she couldn't afford to cater." The decorations came from Mum's garden and craft supplies Sable bought with overtime money from the clinic. She borrowed chairs from the church and spent 3 weeks making those tablecloths because she wanted everything to be perfect. My mouth felt dry. I didn't know. Her engagement ring cost Marcus 4 months of saving every penny from his teaching salary. She's been planning this party since the day he proposed, not because she wanted to show off, but because she wanted to celebrate with people she loves, in a place that feels like home. The room seemed to tilt slightly. "Rowan, I was just making conversation. I didn't mean—" "You called my family low class, Phil, in front of everyone, at my sister's engagement party." "I was being ironic. I said it was charming." "You think that makes it better?" His voice was still quiet, but there was something underneath it that made me step back. "You took the most important night of her life and turned it into a joke for strangers." Through the archway, I could see Sable in the kitchen, surrounded by concerned relatives. She was smiling and nodding, playing the gracious hostess, but her movements had a mechanical quality that broke my heart. "I should apologize," I said. "Yes," Rowan said. "You should." But when I approached the kitchen, the conversation stopped. Patricia looked at me with cold politeness, and Sable's smile never reached her eyes. "I'm sorry if what I said came out wrong," I began. It's fine, Sable said quickly. Really, don't worry about it. But it wasn't fine. I could see it in the way people avoided my eyes, in the careful distance everyone maintained. I'd poisoned something that couldn't be unpoisoned, and my clumsy apology only made it worse. We left early, Daisy falling asleep in the car on the way home. Rowan drove in silence, and I stared out the window, replaying the evening and trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. They'll get over it, I said finally. Rowan didn't respond until we were pulling into our apartment complex. Will they, Phil? Would you? The next morning brought a hangover and the sickening clarity that comes with sobriety. I lay in bed, listening to Rowan get ready for work, and tried to convince myself that the previous night wasn't as bad as I remembered. But when I checked my phone, there were no messages from Sable or Patricia, no photos from the party posted on social media. The silence felt ominous. Rowan appeared in the bedroom doorway, already dressed for work. I called Sable this morning, he said, to apologize. What did she say? That she understood you'd been drinking and that these things happen. He straightened his tie with sharp, precise movements. But Marcus's family is asking questions. His mother wants to know what kind of people her son is marrying into. The implications hit me like cold water. Oh God, I didn't think— No, Rowan said, you didn't. After he left, I sat at our kitchen table with my coffee, staring at my phone and trying to figure out how to fix this. An apology text felt inadequate. Flowers seemed insulting. Maybe if I explained myself properly, helped them understand that I'd been nervous and had simply chosen my words poorly. Instead, I found myself texting my sister Cleo. Had a rough night at Rowan's family thing. People are being dramatic about a stupid comment I made. Her response came quickly. What did you say? I gave her a sanitized version, emphasizing my nervousness and the awkward social dynamics. Cleo, always supportive, responded with exactly what I needed to hear. Sounds like they're overreacting. You were probably just trying to fit in. That became my narrative. By the time I got to work at Henderson Insurance, I'd convinced myself that the real problem was Rowan's family's sensitivity, not my behavior. When my co-worker Janet asked about my weekend, I found myself telling a story about uptight in-laws who couldn't take a joke. Family drama is the worst, Janet sympathized. My husband's family is like that too. Everything becomes a federal case. The validation felt good, but it didn't last. Around noon, I got a text from my mother, Judith. Patricia Greer called me. What happened at that party? I called her during my lunch break, expecting support. Instead, I got a lecture about the importance of family harmony and how I needed to smooth this over before it gets worse. What do you mean, worse? Patricia is hurt, Philomel. Really hurt. She said you embarrassed them in front of their friends and made Sable cry. Sable didn't cry at the party. She cried after you left. Patricia found her in her old bedroom, still in her party dress, crying into her pillow like she was 16 again. That image hit harder than anything else. I'd seen Sable cry exactly once in the 8 years I'd known her, when their family dog died. She wasn't a crier. She was the steady one, the peacemaker, the daughter who called her parents every Sunday and remembered everyone's birthday. I need to fix this, I said. Yes, you do, and quickly. But when I tried calling Sable that afternoon, it went straight to voicemail. My carefully rehearsed apology felt hollow when delivered to a recording. Hi, it's me. I just wanted to say again how sorry I am about last night. I was nervous and said something stupid. You know I think the world of you and your family. Call me back. She didn't call back. That evening, Rowan came home later than usual. When I asked about his day, he was polite but distant, like I was a roommate he didn't particularly like. Did you talk to Sable today? I asked. Briefly. How is she? Upset. He opened the refrigerator and stared into it without taking anything out. Marcus's mother called her this morning. Apparently, someone at the party told Marcus's cousin about your comment, and now his family is wondering if they should postpone the wedding. Postpone? My voice came out higher than I intended. Over something I said? Rowan closed the refrigerator and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. His mother said she doesn't want her son marrying into a family that would humiliate him publicly. She's questioning Sable's character because of your behavior. That's insane. Sable didn't do anything wrong. No, Phil, she didn't, but you did, and now she's paying for it. The unfairness of it made me angry. So I'm supposed to be responsible for what other people think. I made one comment, one poorly chosen comment at a family party, and now everyone's acting like I committed a crime. You called my family low class in front of strangers. I said it was charming. After you called us low class. We were shouting now, something we rarely did. From her bedroom, I could hear Daisy's music get louder, her way of drowning out adult conflict. I was trying to be funny, I said, lowering my voice. I was nervous and trying to make conversation with people I don't know. It came out wrong. It came out exactly how you meant it, Rowan said quietly. You think my family isn't good enough for you. You've always thought that. That's not true, isn't it? He leaned against the counter, studying my face. When's the last time you asked my mother about her book club? When's the last time you remembered my father's birthday without me reminding you? When's the last time you seemed genuinely happy to be at a family gathering, instead of acting like you're doing us a favor by showing up? I opened my mouth to argue, but the words wouldn't come, because he was right, and we both knew it. I love your family, I said finally. No, Phil, you tolerate my family. There's a difference. That night, we went to bed without resolving anything. Rowan fell asleep quickly, but I lay awake replaying the conversation and trying to figure out how everything had gotten so complicated. The next few days followed a pattern. I'd try to reach out to Sable or Patricia. They'd be polite but distant, and Rowan would come home with updates that made everything sound worse. Marcus's family was asking more questions. People at Sable's work had heard about the party. Even Rowan's extended family was talking. It's like a game of telephone, I complained to Cleo during one of our phone calls. By the time the story gets around, I'll probably be accused of setting the house on fire. Maybe you should just give them some space, Cleo suggested. Let things cool down. But I couldn't leave it alone. The silence from Rowan's family felt like an accusation, and their politeness was worse than anger would have been. I needed to fix this, to prove that I wasn't the terrible person they apparently thought I was. So I did what I always did when I felt misunderstood and unappreciated. I looked for validation elsewhere. Miles Calder worked in marketing at a company that shared our office building. We'd been friendly for months, exchanging pleasantries in the elevator and occasionally grabbing coffee from the lobby cart at the same time. He was charming in an easy way that made conversation feel effortless, and he had a talent for making me feel interesting and sophisticated. You look like you could use a drink, he said when he ran into me in the lobby on Thursday evening. I must have looked as frustrated as I felt, because his expression was genuinely concerned. Family drama, I said, the kind that makes you question your life choices. Want to talk about it? There's a wine bar around the corner that's perfect for drowning family drama. I should have said no, should have gone home to Rowan and Daisy and worked on rebuilding what I'd damaged. Instead, I found myself sitting across from Miles in a dimly lit bar, telling him a version of the engagement party story that cast me as the victim of an oversensitive family's overreaction. Sounds like they're being pretty harsh, Miles said, refilling my wine glass. One comment at a party, and they're treating you like a pariah. Exactly. The validation felt like cool water on a burn. I mean, I apologized. Multiple times. What more can I do? Some people just like to hold grudges, he said. Makes them feel important. It was exactly what I needed to hear, and exactly what I shouldn't have been hearing. Miles made me feel reasonable and misunderstood, rather than guilty and ashamed. He listened without judgment and offered sympathy without conditions. When I got home that night, Rowan was helping Daisy with her homework at the kitchen table. They looked up when I walked in, and I saw something flicker across Rowan's face when he noticed my slightly flushed cheeks and wine-bright eyes. "How was work?" he asked. "Fine. Long day." I kissed the top of Daisy's head and avoided Rowan's gaze. "How's the math homework going, sweetheart?" "Daddy's helping me with fractions," Daisy said. "They're hard." "But you're getting it," Rowan said, squeezing her shoulder. "Just takes practice." I watched them work together, their heads bent over the worksheet, and felt a pang of something I couldn't quite name. Guilt, maybe, or loneliness. They looked complete without me, like a unit that functioned perfectly well on its own. Later, after Daisy was in bed, Rowan and I sat in our living room with the television on, not really watching anything. "Sable called today," he said during a commercial break. "Oh?" I tried to sound casual. "How is she?" "Better. Marcus talked to his mother, explained that you're not representative of our family. They're back on track for the wedding." I should have felt relieved, but instead I felt oddly deflated. "So everything's fine now?" "With the wedding, yes. With us?" He looked at me directly for the first time in days. "I don't know, Phil. I really don't know." The following week brought an uncomfortable new normal. Rowan was polite but distant, like we were acquaintances sharing living space, rather than partners building a life together. He focused on Daisy, on work, on anything that didn't require meaningful interaction with me. I told myself it would pass, that he just needed time to get over his hurt feelings and remember that I was the mother of his child, his partner of 8 years. But as the days stretched on, his coldness became harder to ignore. "Maybe you should plan something nice for him," my mother suggested during our weekly phone call. "A special dinner or a weekend getaway. Show him you're committed to making things right." It was good advice, but when I tried to implement it, Rowan's responses were politely non-committal. Yes, dinner out would be nice, but he'd already promised to help his father with a project that weekend. Yes, we should spend more time together, but work was busy and Daisy had school activities. Every suggestion was met with a reasonable excuse that left no room for argument, but made it clear that rebuilding our relationship wasn't his priority. The isolation at home made my growing friendship with Miles feel like a lifeline. Our coffee breaks became longer, our conversations more personal. He was going through his own relationship difficulties, he told me, and understood what it felt like to be taken for granted by someone who was supposed to love you. "The thing about long-term relationships," he said one afternoon as we sat in the lobby cafe, "is that people stop seeing you. They think they know everything about you, so they stop paying attention." "Yes," I said, probably too enthusiastically. "That's exactly it. Rowan acts like I'm this terrible person because of one mistake, but he doesn't see all the ways I've supported him over the years." "You've been together how long?" 8 years. We have a daughter together. I've been patient with his family, supportive of his career, understanding about his emotional distance. But I make one comment that comes out wrong, and suddenly I'm the villain. Miles nodded sympathetically. "Sounds like he's looking for reasons to be angry with you." It was a dangerous thought, but one that felt validating. Maybe Rowan's reaction wasn't really about what I'd said at the party. Maybe it was about deeper issues in our relationship, problems that had been building for years. That evening, I tried to talk to Rowan about us, about what we needed to do to move forward, but the conversation felt stilted and artificial, like we were reading from scripts neither of us believed in. "I know you're still upset about the party," I said as we cleaned up after dinner, "but we can't let one bad night ruin everything we've built. It's not about one night, Phil." "Then what is it about?" He was quiet for a long moment, loading dishes into the dishwasher with careful precision. "It's about who you are when you think no one's watching. It's about what you really think of the people I love. I love your family. You love the idea of loving my family. There's a difference." I wanted to argue, but something in his tone made me hesitate. "What do you mean?" "You love them when it's convenient, when it makes you look good or feel good about yourself. But when they're just being themselves, when they're not performing for your approval, you see them as beneath you." That's not fair, isn't it? He turned to face me, and his expression was sadder than angry. When's the last time you asked Sable about her job? Not to be polite, but because you actually cared about her answer. I opened my mouth to respond, but realized I couldn't remember. When's the last time you seemed genuinely happy to be at a family gathering, not tolerating it for my sake, but actually enjoying yourself? Again, I had no answer. That's what I mean, Phil. You go through the motions, but you don't really see them as people worth knowing. And at the party, when you wanted to impress strangers, your real feelings came out. The conversation haunted me for days. I found myself replaying interactions with Rowan's family, trying to remember moments of genuine connection and coming up short. Had I really been that dismissive? That condescending? You're overthinking this, Miles said, when I confided my doubts during another coffee break. People say things they don't mean when they're nervous or stressed. It doesn't define who you are. But what if it does? What if Rowan's right about me? Rowan sounds like he's being pretty unforgiving. Marriage is supposed to be about accepting each other's flaws, not keeping score of every mistake. His words felt like absolution, and I found myself looking forward to our conversations more than anything else in my day. Miles made me feel understood in a way that Rowan hadn't in years. He listened without judgment, offered perspective without condemnation. When he suggested we grab dinner after work one evening, it felt natural to say yes. Just as friends, he said with a smile that suggested he understood the complexity of my situation. Sometimes you need to talk to someone who isn't invested in your drama. The restaurant he chose was intimate and dimly lit, the kind of place where conversations felt private, even with other diners nearby. We talked about work, about our respective relationship challenges, about dreams we'd put on hold for practical considerations. You're more interesting than you give yourself credit for, Miles said over dessert. I think you've been playing it safe for so long that you've forgotten who you really are. The compliment made me flush with pleasure. When was the last time Rowan had called me interesting? When was the last time he'd seemed curious about my thoughts or dreams? I should probably get home, I said, but I made no move to leave. Probably, Miles agreed, but he was looking at me in a way that made my stomach flutter. Nothing happened that night. We said goodbye in the restaurant parking lot with a friendly hug that lasted just a moment too long. But driving home, I felt more alive than I had in months. Rowan was asleep when I got home, and I was grateful not to have to explain where I'd been or why I was later than expected. I lay awake beside him, replaying the evening and trying to understand what was happening to me. I wasn't having an affair. I was just talking to a friend who made me feel valued and appreciated. There was nothing wrong with that, was there? But even as I told myself that, I knew I was crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed. The secrecy itself was a betrayal, even if nothing physical had happened. The next morning brought a text from Miles. Thanks for dinner. You're great company. I stared at the message for a long moment before responding. Thanks for listening. I needed that. It was innocent enough, but I deleted the conversation before putting my phone away, just in case. That weekend, Rowan took Daisy to visit his parents without inviting me. It was the first time in 8 years that I'd been excluded from a family gathering, and the message was clear. I was no longer welcome. They need some space, Rowan explained when I asked about it. After everything that happened. It's been 2 weeks. Some things take time to heal. I spent the day alone, cleaning the apartment and trying not to think about what Rowan's family was saying about me in my absence. Were they relieved I wasn't there? Were they discussing what Rowan should do about our relationship? When Miles texted to see if I wanted to grab coffee, I said yes immediately. We met at a cafe across town, far from our usual spots near work. It felt clandestine and exciting, like we were teenagers sneaking around instead of adults having coffee. You look stressed, he said, studying my face across the small table. Rowan took our daughter to visit his family without me. First time that's ever happened. Ouch, that's harsh. I keep thinking I should fight for myself more, you know? Stand up and say that I've apologized enough, that they need to forgive me and move on. Maybe you should. How long are you supposed to grovel for one comment? It was exactly what I wanted to hear, and exactly what I shouldn't have been hearing. Miles made my anger feel justified, my resentment reasonable. With him, I wasn't the villain of the story. I was the misunderstood protagonist, struggling against unfair circumstances. When he reached across the table and squeezed my hand, I didn't pull away. "You deserve better than this," he said softly. And for the first time since the engagement party, I believed him. 3 weeks after the engagement party, I finally got a call from Sable. I was at work, mindlessly filing insurance claims, when her name appeared on my phone screen. "Hi," she said when I answered, her voice carefully neutral. "I wanted to talk to you about something." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Of course, what's going on?" "Marcus and I are having an engagement party due over next Saturday. Something small, just immediate family and a few close friends. I wanted you to know that you're welcome to come, but I'll understand if you'd rather not." The invitation felt like a test, and I wasn't sure what the right answer was. "Sable, I'm so sorry about what happened. I've been wanting to talk to you, but I didn't know if—" "It's okay," she said quickly. "Really, I know you didn't mean to hurt anyone, but that night was important to me, and I need a chance to celebrate without complications. I understand, and yes, I'd like to come, if you're sure. I'm sure, just maybe keep it low-key. It's going to be a much smaller group this time." After we hung up, I sat at my desk feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. This was my chance to redeem myself, to prove that I could be the supportive sister-in-law Sable deserved. I would be perfect, gracious, interested, appropriately enthusiastic without being overwhelming. When I told Rowan about the invitation that evening, he looked surprised. "She called you directly?" "Yes, she said she wanted me there." "Huh." He seemed to be processing this information. "That's good. She's trying to move forward." "We all are," I said, hoping it sounded more confident than I felt. But as the week progressed, my anxiety about the party grew. What if I said something wrong again? What if Rowan's family was still angry and just being polite? What if I made things worse instead of better? Miles had become my primary source of emotional support, and I found myself texting him throughout the day, sharing my worries and soaking up his reassurance. "You're overthinking this," he wrote back when I confessed my fears about the upcoming party. "Just be yourself. If they can't appreciate you, that's their loss." But being myself was exactly what had gotten me into trouble in the first place. I needed to be a better version of myself, someone who thought before speaking and considered other people's feelings before making jokes. The morning of the party, I spent an hour getting ready, changing clothes 3 times before settling on a simple navy dress that seemed appropriately understated. Rowan watched me fuss with my hair and makeup with an expression I couldn't read. "You look fine," he said when I asked for his opinion for the 3rd time. "Just fine." "You look beautiful, Phil. You always do." But there was something distant in his tone, like he was commenting on a stranger's appearance rather than his partner's. The do-over party was indeed smaller, held in Patricia and Alan's backyard with maybe 20 people instead of the 40 or 50 who'd attended the original celebration. Sable greeted me with a warm hug, and I felt some of my tension ease. "Thank you for coming," she said. "It means a lot." I was determined to be the perfect guest. I complimented the decorations, asked thoughtful questions about the wedding plans, and made sure to spend time talking to Marcus's parents, who seemed cautiously friendly. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. I helped Patricia carry food from the kitchen, played with Daisy and the other children, and managed to have what felt like genuine conversations with several family members. But as the evening wore on, I became increasingly aware of the subtle ways I was being managed. Conversations would shift when I joined them, as if people had been discussing topics they didn't want me to hear. Rowan stayed close, not in a protective way, but like he was monitoring my behavior. The realization that I was being watched and judged made me self-conscious in a way that was almost worse than being ignored. Every word felt calculated, every laugh forced. I was performing the role of the reformed sister-in-law, and everyone knew it. "Having fun?" Miles texted during a quiet moment when I'd stepped inside to use the bathroom. "Trying to. Family stuff is complicated," I texted back. "Want to grab coffee tomorrow and debrief?" "Yes, definitely." I deleted the conversation before returning to the party, but the brief interaction with Miles had reminded me that there was someone in my life who didn't require me to perform or apologize or carefully monitor my every word. The party ended without incident. I said all the right things, thanked Sable and her parents graciously, and managed to get through the evening without embarrassing myself or anyone else. "That went well," Rowan said as we drove home. "Did it? I felt like everyone was waiting for me to mess up again." "Maybe because you were trying so hard not to." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing, just you seemed tense." I wanted to argue, but he was right. I had been tense, hyper-aware of every interaction, and terrified of making another mistake. It was exhausting. The next morning, I met Miles at our usual cafe, grateful for the chance to talk to someone who didn't make me feel like I was walking on eggshells. "Sounds like you handled it perfectly," he said, after I'd described the previous evening, "but it also sounds like they're never going to let you forget what happened." "I don't know. Maybe I deserve that." "Do you? One comment at a party, and you're supposed to spend the rest of your life proving you're sorry." When he put it like that, it did seem excessive. "I just want things to go back to normal." "Maybe normal wasn't that great to begin with," Miles said gently. "Maybe this is a chance to figure out what you really want." It was a dangerous thought, but not one I could easily dismiss. What did I want? When was the last time I'd asked myself that question? "I want to feel appreciated," I said finally. "I want to feel like someone sees me as more than just a collection of mistakes and obligations." "You deserve that," Miles said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "Everyone deserves that." His touch sent a jolt of electricity up my arm, and I didn't pull away. We sat there for a moment, hands connected across the small table, and I felt more seen and understood than I had in months. "We should probably," I started to say, but I didn't finish the sentence. "Probably," Miles agreed, but he didn't let go of my hand. That afternoon, for the first time in our friendship, things crossed a line they shouldn't have crossed. It started with coffee and conversation, moved to a walk through the park near his apartment, and ended with a kiss that tasted like possibility and regret in equal measure. "I should go," I said afterward, but I didn't move away from him. "Should and want are different things," he said softly. He was right, and that was the problem. I should go home to Rowan and Daisy, should work on rebuilding what I'd damaged, should be grateful for second chances and family forgiveness. But I wanted to stay with Miles, wanted to feel desired and interesting and appreciated. I wanted to be with someone who saw my flaws as human rather than unforgivable. I went home that evening, carrying the weight of a secret that felt both thrilling and terrifying. Rowan was helping Daisy with a school project at the kitchen table, and they both looked up when I walked in. "How was your day?" Rowan asked, the same question he asked every evening. "Fine," I said, the same answer I always gave, but everything had changed, and I wasn't sure there was any way back to the life I'd been living just that morning. That night, lying in bed beside Rowan, I stared at the ceiling and tried to understand what I was doing. I wasn't a cheater. I wasn't someone who destroyed families or betrayed trust, but I was also someone who felt invisible in her own relationship, someone who'd made a mistake that seemed to define her forever in the eyes of people she was supposed to love. Miles made me feel like I could be forgiven, like I could be more than the sum of my worst moments. Was that worth risking everything I'd built with Rowan? I didn't have an answer, but I also couldn't bring myself to end what had started. The next morning, when Miles texted to say he couldn't stop thinking about me, I texted back instead of deleting the message. And with that simple response, I stepped fully into a double life that would ultimately destroy everything I thought I wanted to save. Living a double life turned out to be easier than I'd expected and harder than I could have imagined. The logistics were simple enough: lunch meetings that ran long, evening work obligations that didn't exist, weekend errands that took me across town to coffee shops where no one knew me. Miles and I fell into a rhythm of stolen moments and careful planning. We met twice a week, sometimes 3 times when I could manage it. Our conversations ranged from the mundane details of our days to deeper discussions about what we wanted from life, what we felt we'd been denied in our respective relationships. "You're different when you're away from all that family drama," Miles said one afternoon as we sat in his car in a parking lot downtown. "More relaxed, more yourself." "This is myself," I said, and realized I meant it. With Miles, I didn't have to apologize for my personality or carefully monitor my words. I could be sharp and funny and occasionally mean, and he found it entertaining rather than offensive. "Rowan doesn't see this side of you?" "Rowan sees the side of me that messed up his sister's engagement party and embarrassed his family. That's all he sees anymore." It was becoming easier to cast Rowan as the villain in my story, the unforgiving partner who couldn't move past my mistakes. Miles encouraged this narrative, not maliciously, but because it justified what we were doing together. "Some people are just punishers," he said. "They find your weak spots and keep pressing on them, making sure you never forget your failures." The description felt accurate, even though a small part of me knew it wasn't entirely fair. Rowan wasn't cruel or vindictive. He was hurt and struggling to trust me again. But acknowledging that would have required me to acknowledge my own role in damaging that trust, and I wasn't ready to do that. At home, the distance between Rowan and me continued to grow. We were polite to each other, functional as co-parents, but the warmth and intimacy that had once defined our relationship seemed irretrievably lost. "Mummy, why don't you and Daddy hug anymore?" Daisy asked one evening as I was tucking her into bed. The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "You used to hug when Daddy came home from work. Now you just say hi." I didn't know how to answer that without lying or sharing more than a 7-year-old should have to hear. "Sometimes grown-ups go through difficult times," I said finally, "but we both love you very much. Are you going to get divorced like Emma's parents?" "No," I said quickly, though I wasn't sure I believed it. "Daddy and I are just figuring some things out." But even as I reassured Daisy, I wondered if we were heading toward exactly that outcome. Our conversations had become limited to logistics: who would pick up Daisy from school, what we needed from the grocery store, when bills were due. We hadn't been physically intimate in weeks, and the emotional intimacy that had once been the foundation of our relationship felt like a distant memory. "Maybe you should try counseling," my sister Cleo suggested when I called her one evening, feeling particularly lonely. "Rowan would never agree to that." "Have you asked him?" I hadn't, because I was afraid of what we might discover in counseling. A therapist would probably tell me to end my relationship with Miles, to take full responsibility for the damage I'd caused, to work harder at rebuilding trust. I wasn't ready to hear any of that. Instead, I found myself spending more time with Miles, letting our relationship evolve from emotional affair to something more physical. It happened gradually, in stages that each felt like small transgressions rather than major betrayals. A longer kiss here, a more intimate conversation there, an afternoon in his apartment when I should have been running errands. "I feel terrible about this," I told him one afternoon as we lay together in his bed. "About us, about lying to Rowan, about Daisy, about everything." Miles was quiet for a moment, tracing patterns on my shoulder with his finger. "Do you want to stop?" I considered the question seriously. Did I want to stop? The guilt was eating at me, but so was the loneliness I felt at home. With Miles, I felt desired and appreciated and forgiven. With Rowan, I felt like a permanent disappointment. I don't know, I said honestly. Then don't decide today. See how you feel tomorrow. It was exactly the kind of non-advice that allowed me to keep postponing any real decisions about my life. Tomorrow became next week became next month, and still I continued living in two worlds that felt increasingly incompatible. The first sign that my careful compartmentalization was failing came on a Thursday evening in late October. I was supposed to be at a work happy hour, but I was actually having dinner with Miles at a restaurant across town. We'd chosen the place specifically because it was far from our usual haunts, somewhere we were unlikely to run into anyone we knew. But as we were leaving, I heard someone call my name. I turned to see Jennifer, Sable's college roommate from the engagement party, walking toward us with a confused smile. "Philomel, what a surprise. How are you?" My mouth went dry. "Hi, Jennifer. I'm fine. Good to see you." Her eyes moved to Miles, clearly expecting an introduction. "This is Miles," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "A colleague from work." "Nice to meet you," Miles said smoothly, shaking her hand. "Phil and I were just grabbing dinner after a client meeting." Jennifer nodded, but I could see questions in her eyes. Why was I having dinner with a male colleague at a romantic restaurant? Why did I look so flustered? Why was I 20 miles from where I'd told Rowan I would be? "Well, it was good seeing you," she said after a moment of awkward small talk. "Tell Rowan I said hello." "I will," I said, knowing I absolutely wouldn't. As she walked away, I felt the walls of my double life closing in. Jennifer wasn't particularly close to Rowan's family, but she was friendly with Sable. Would she mention seeing me? Would she think anything of it, or would it just be a casual comment about running into me at dinner? "She seemed nice," Miles said as we got into his car. "She's Sable's friend, from the engagement party." "Ah." He was quiet for a moment. "Think she'll say anything?" "I don't know. Maybe. Probably not." But I spent the next few days in a state of low-level panic, waiting for Rowan to ask questions that never came. Either Jennifer hadn't mentioned seeing me, or she had, and Rowan didn't think it was worth discussing. I wasn't sure which possibility was worse. The second sign came in the form of a phone bill that arrived while I was at work. Rowan called me that evening, his voice carefully neutral. "I need to ask you about something," he said. "There's a number on our phone bill that's been called a lot, more than anyone else except your mother and sister." My stomach dropped. I'd been careful about deleting text conversations with Miles, but I hadn't thought about the phone records. "What number?" He read it off, and I recognized Miles's cell phone immediately. "Oh, that's someone from work. We've been collaborating on a project." "What kind of project?" The lie came easily. Too easily. "Insurance fraud investigation. It's been really time-consuming." "Huh, you haven't mentioned it." "I didn't think you'd be interested. It's pretty boring stuff." Rowan was quiet for a long moment. "Okay," he said finally. "Just wondering." But I could hear the doubt in his voice, and I knew that my time was running out. He was starting to pay attention, starting to ask questions, and I didn't have good answers for any of them. That night, I lay awake beside him, listening to his breathing and trying to figure out how to extricate myself from the mess I'd created. I could end things with Miles, confess everything to Rowan, and hope that honesty might begin to rebuild the trust I'd shattered. Or I could continue lying, continue living two lives, and hope that I was smart enough to keep all the pieces from colliding. Neither option felt like one I could live with, but I was running out of alternatives, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sound of everything I'd built beginning to crumble. The end came, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet accumulation of evidence that made denial impossible. It started with small things. Rowan asking more questions about my schedule, paying closer attention to my explanations, checking details that he'd previously taken on faith. "How was the insurance conference?" he asked one evening after I'd spent the afternoon with Miles. I stared at him blankly. "What conference?" "You said you had to attend a conference downtown today, about fraud prevention." I had no memory of saying that, but I must have needed an excuse for my absence. "Oh, right, it was fine. Pretty boring, actually." "What company sponsored it?" The question felt like a trap, but I couldn't figure out why he'd be testing me. "I don't remember. Some big insurance firm." Rowan nodded and went back to reading his book, but I could feel suspicion radiating from him like heat. The next morning, I found him in the kitchen with his laptop open, staring at the screen with an expression I'd never seen before. "Find anything interesting?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "I was looking for information about that conference you attended yesterday. Funny thing, I can't find any record of an insurance fraud conference happening in the city yesterday." My mouth went dry. Maybe it was last week. I get confused about dates sometimes. Maybe. But he was looking at me like he was seeing a stranger. "Phil, is there something you want to tell me?" This was my moment. I could confess everything, throw myself on his mercy, and hope that honesty might begin to repair the damage I'd done. Instead, I doubled down on the lie. "I don't know what you're implying, but I don't like your tone." "My tone? You're acting like I'm some kind of criminal. I made a mistake about a date. It happens." Rowan closed his laptop slowly. "You're right, I'm sorry. I'm probably being paranoid." But he wasn't being paranoid, and we both knew it. The trust between us had eroded to the point where he felt compelled to fact-check my daily activities, and I was lying so frequently that I couldn't keep my story straight. That evening, I met Miles at our usual coffee shop, feeling shaken by the morning's conversation. "He's getting suspicious," I told him. "I think he knows something." Miles reached across the table and took my hand. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know. Maybe we should cool things off for a while. Give me time to fix things at home." "Is that what you really want?" The question hung between us like a challenge. What did I really want? To go back to my life with Rowan, with its comfortable routines and accumulated resentments? To continue sneaking around with Miles, living in constant fear of discovery? To blow up everything and start over? "I want to not have to choose," I said finally. "That's not really an option anymore, is it?" He was right, but I wasn't ready to make a decision. I was still hoping for a third option, some way to have everything I wanted without paying the full price for any of it. But 3 days later, that choice was taken away from me. I was at work when Rowan called, his voice eerily calm. "I need you to come home, now." "What's wrong? Is Daisy okay?" "Daisy's fine. She's at my mother's. Just come home, Phil." The drive home felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. I ran through possible explanations for his tone, his request to send Daisy away, his insistence that I come home immediately. Had someone seen me with Miles? Had he found more evidence? Had I left something incriminating where he could find it? When I walked into our apartment, Rowan was sitting at the kitchen table with a manila folder in front of him. His face was pale, but his expression was resolute. "Sit down," he said. I sat, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I hired a private investigator," he said without preamble, 3 weeks ago when I started noticing inconsistencies in your stories." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You what?" I didn't want to believe it. I kept hoping I was being paranoid, that there was some innocent explanation for all the lies and secrecy. He opened the folder and pulled out a stack of photographs. "But there isn't, is there?" The photos were devastating in their clarity. Me and Miles having coffee. Me and Miles walking hand in hand through a park. Me and Miles kissing in his car. Me leaving his apartment building on a Tuesday afternoon when I was supposed to be at work. "How long?" Rowan asked. I stared at the photos, unable to speak. Seeing our relationship documented like this made it seem sordid and cheap, rather than romantic and meaningful. "How long, Phil?" "6 weeks," I whispered, "since right after Sable's second party." I nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "So while I was trying to rebuild our relationship, while I was giving you the benefit of the doubt about your behavior at the engagement party, you were cheating on me. It wasn't supposed to happen. I was lonely, and you were so angry with me, and he made me feel—" "Don't." Rowan's voice was sharp. "Don't you dare try to make this my fault." "I'm not. I'm just trying to explain—" "There's no explanation that makes this okay." He pulled out another set of documents. Bank records showing charges at restaurants and hotels on days when you told me you were working late. Phone records showing hundreds of calls and texts to a number you claimed was work-related. Witness statements from people who've seen you together. The scope of his investigation was breathtaking. He'd been methodical, thorough, building an airtight case against me, while I'd been carelessly living my double life. "I know about every lie you've told me in the past 6 weeks," he continued. "Every fake work meeting, every imaginary conference, every time you claimed to be running errands while you were actually with him." I felt like I was drowning. "Rowan, please. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can—" "No." His voice was final. "We can't." He pulled out a final set of documents. "I've already filed for custody of Daisy. My lawyer says the evidence of adultery and deception gives me a strong case for primary custody. You can't take her away from me." "I'm not taking her away. I'm protecting her from the chaos you've created." His voice softened slightly. "She's been asking questions, Phil, about why we don't talk anymore, why you're gone so much, why the house feels different. She knows something's wrong." The mention of Daisy broke something inside me. "She doesn't have to know about this. We can keep it between us." "Like you kept your affair between us." I had no answer for that. Rowan stood up and walked to the window, his back to me. "I've already talked to a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce. You can contest it if you want, but the evidence is pretty overwhelming." "What about us? What about everything we built together?" He turned around, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I saw pain in his eyes instead of just anger. "You destroyed what we built, Phil. The night you called my family low class, and every day since then, when you chose to lie to me instead of trying to fix things." "I was trying to fix things." "You were trying to have it both ways. You wanted the security of our relationship and the excitement of something new. You wanted me to forgive you for humiliating my family while you were betraying me behind my back." The truth of his words was undeniable. I had wanted it both ways. I'd wanted to be forgiven without really changing, to be trusted while actively lying, to keep all my options open while making choices that closed them off. "Where does this leave us?" I asked. "It leaves you with a choice," Rowan said. "You can make this easy, agree to reasonable custody arrangements and a fair division of assets, and we can both move on with our lives. Or you can fight it, drag everything through court, and make sure Daisy gets to hear all the details of why her parents' marriage fell apart." The threat was clear, and it was effective. The last thing I wanted was for Daisy to learn about my affair, to have to choose sides in a battle between her parents. "I need time to think," I said. "You have until Monday to let my lawyer know your decision." That weekend was the longest of my life. I stayed in a hotel, since Rowan had made it clear I wasn't welcome in our apartment. I called my mother, my sister, even Miles, looking for someone to tell me that I could still fix this, that it wasn't too late to save my marriage. But everyone gave me the same advice. Accept Rowan's terms, try to minimize the damage to Daisy, and start rebuilding my life from scratch. On Monday morning, I met with Rowan's lawyer and signed the papers that ended my marriage and gave him primary custody of our daughter. The woman who'd called his family low class had lost everything that mattered to her, and there was no one to blame but herself. 6 months later, I see Daisy every other weekend, and one evening a week. Rowan is polite but distant when we interact, treating me like a stranger he's obligated to deal with for our daughter's sake. His family doesn't speak to me at all. Miles and I lasted another month after my divorce was finalized. Without the excitement of secrecy and the validation of being chosen over someone else, our relationship revealed itself to be exactly what it had always been, a fantasy that couldn't survive reality. I live alone now in a small apartment across town, working the same job and trying to figure out how to rebuild a life that I destroyed with my own choices. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd handled that engagement party differently, if I'd been able to apologize sincerely and move on. But mostly, I try not to think about it at all, because the truth is that the engagement party wasn't really the beginning of the end. It was just the moment when my real character was revealed, when the person I'd always been underneath the polite facade finally came to the surface. I called his family low class, but in the end, I was the one who proved to have no class at all.